I wanted to try and show you that the bitext2tmx program does actually work quite well. I'm sorry, there are various pop-ups coming up on the screen here. Just ignore those, please. Now, the beauty of this program is that it's free, and it also means that you can convert text files. In other words, if you have a pair of translated files which are saved as text and not as Word documents, bitext2tmx will accept this as an input, will enable you to align them so that all the segments match up correctly, and save them in the TMX format. Now, this stands for Translation Memory Exchange. This is a format that all TM software understands. It effectively means, therefore, that any translation memory that you have can be converted to this format and then used by any other piece of software. This has quite important implications, because it means that you could build translation memory in Metatexas or WordFast or Amiga T or any of the other programs, and save that translation memory in such a format that it can be used by any other program. So you can save a Metatexas translation memory in such a way that it can be imported back into Tredos, for example. What I regard as the really good thing about bitext2tmx is that it completely bypasses Word. Now, some of you, well, it will have become apparent from the discussion board, there are a number of issues surrounding whether programs like WordFisher can be used with later versions of Windows. Some of you have had problems with Vista. There are issues to do with later releases of Word, like Word 2007. The beauty of bitext2tmx is that if you have your paired files in text, you can instantly convert them to a format that can be used by your translation memory software. And there's quite a lot to be said for that. Okay, I'm going to open up bitext2tmx. I'm running this on a very ancient laptop, so everything is going to take a little while to happen. Now, I think, as I mentioned before, bitext2tmx is so-called open source. This is freeware. And what you're presented with here is a fairly unfriendly welcoming screen. And yet you can sort of get a feel for it, because there are two windows, and I think your expectation would be, well, source text might be here, target text might be there. But okay, what we're going to want to do is go to the File menu, and we need to open a file. So my source language is going to be French, and I'm going to browse for the files that I'm going to use. And what I've done is prepared two texts, which are short versions of the files from one of the larger corpuses. The thing about bitext is that you can't save what you've done and return to it. So the point to bear in mind here is that what you may want to do is cut up files so that what you've got is maybe 10 minutes worth or a quarter of an hour's worth, because I think this, you don't want to do this for too long at a time because it is labour intensive and it does get to be quite boring. So what I've got here is a file I've called shortgid French, and I'm going to use the ISO coding. Now my target language is English, that's okay. I'm going to browse for the other file, and you probably spotted it before. It's called shortgid eng. I'm going to use the same coding. The coding selection makes a difference to accented characters. And so just to recap, I've got my source file, I've got my target file, I've specified the source language, the target language, and I've made a choice about the so-called encoding. Okay, now as you can see, the texts appear side by side, and down below here you can see that what is being displayed in the left-hand window here is what it thinks is the first segment with the target first segment. Well, that's clearly not right. So if I move my cursor to the end of the title word immoraliste and hit split, that seems to have worked. And if I do the same over here, so we've made a split in the segment, which makes a little bit more sense, and we can now move down to the second segment, and you would go through the same process again. In other words, you may decide that you want to have a split there, the point to bear in mind is that the shorter your segments, the greater the likelihood that if these will ultimately go into a translation memory. Shorter the segment, then the greater likelihood that in a future translation you will end up with a whole match or a partial match. If segments are too long, in other words you've got a huge sentence or a paragraph, then the likelihood of a match is actually fairly remote. So essentially you would go through this process with each of your segments until you were satisfied that you had a proper match, and at the end you would go to save as, and you'll see that the file type that is being suggested to you is a TMX file. Now, as I mentioned, TMX means that this can be used by other software. If I save that, I'm going to use the ISO coding. And if I now close this, and now we know that somewhere we have got a file ending in TMX containing those two files. Remember that I've only tidied up two of the segments, but it has produced a translation memory. Now if we have a look at this, I'm going to go to a little program that I've recommended to you called NoteTab. There is a free version of that called NoteTab Lite. I'm just going to get rid of these files here, and I'm going to open up the file called shortgfriend.tmx. Now, if you ignore a lot of the tagging that is around there, you can basically see here, it says here, this appears to be segment 0, the language is French, the item in that segment is l'immoraliste, and the target term in the language which is N, English, is the immoralist. Down here we've got the second segment, segment 1, Je donne ce livre pour ce qu'il vaut. I present this book for what it is worth. So, point about a TMX file is that it is a plain text file, which you could therefore look at in Word, but the problem is that Word would immediately want to transform it from a text file into a Word document file, and if you forgot to save it as text, then it would cease to be usable as a TMX, which is why I like to work with text editors and not with Word. But you can effectively see what's going on here. Your TMX file simply has a succession of segments in which you have the source segment and the target segment, one after the other. And where you have this format, then and you'll notice that at the top here it basically says that it tells us what the two languages are. This TMX file can be used with any of the other packages, right? So you could import this into Metatexas, you could import it into WordFast, you could import it into Trados, any of the other programs that you might want to investigate for the second assignment. So it's a fairly primitive piece of software. There are very few frills to it, but it does actually work quite nicely. And it means that you can produce translation memories from paired files that you have previously saved as text without having to go through any of the other software programs, and particularly means that you can completely bypass Word if that is an issue for you. So I hope that's clarified the working of bitext2tmx.